cactus flowers grow. I was wishing the world would stop when you said we better go.
Good evening, everybody, and we're glad you're here. We're glad to be here. I know that this site is a source of great concern for you. You have concerns about public health. You have concerns about whether or not the site will be cleaned up. And I think this meeting tonight is really about moving forward. I'm going to give a presentation, and in the presentation, I hope that many of your questions about things like...
Excuse me, can you speak up?
Can we turn the volume up a little
Or
bit?
something, if there's nothing, we can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. So we have a lot of information to cover, and the primary purpose of the meeting is to address your concerns. Many of them will be addressed in the presentation, or you may decide that after listening to the presentation and looking through the fact sheets that we've given out, that those concerns, your question, we may phrase it a little bit differently to make it more specific. A couple of things I'd like to say before I introduce the panel. This is the first of many opportunities for outreach with your community on this site. This begins tonight, which you'll see, as Cheryl mentioned, myself and her, members from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Natural Resources in Buncombe County in your community, passing out some literature and discussing some additional well surveys that we'll be doing. We also have a website. Not perfectly up to date. You'll forgive me. I need another 2 days to get all the new information on the website, but we'll have that updated. And we also, there is currently information at the Asheville Public Library, which is the administrative record for the site. An administrative record documents why EPA took an action at a site. It is not a complete repository of all the information. So we're going to try to make, to the best of our ability, in the weeks to come, expand that administrative record into more of a repository so that if you wish to review the records yourself, you can. Okay. I became the federal on-scene coordinator for this site in May of this year. And I've been active in the community and with the respondents, the CTS Corporation, and current site owner, Mills Gap Associates, we call them the respondents because that's their term under the administrative order of consent we have with them since then. And while I have a pretty good knowledge of what's going on site, obviously when you take over a site, you don't have the complete set of institutional knowledge for a site that goes back with the emergency response program since 1999. So I have a variety of sort of backup here. And as you ask questions, if there are questions that I cannot address or there are specifics that I think might enhance the answer, I'm going to come to the panel. So let me introduce them. They're from a variety of agencies, some public health, some state, and some from EPA. The far end of the table is Ken Rudo, who's a toxicologist with the North Carolina Division of Health.
Could you raise your hand so we could see?
There we go.
Thank you.
And then moving towards me, we have Ricky Langley, who is... Stand up. There we go. Please stand up, Ricky. Thank you. Ricky is a toxicologist here. Ken Rudo. Ricky is an MD, also and a physician, obviously, with the Division of Public Health. Then we have Peter Costa, who's the public health educator with the North Carolina Division of Health. We have John Masters, who's a public health assessor, and there is currently a public health evaluation going on. That's in John's camp. We have Jim Bateson, who's a supervisor of the North Carolina Superfund and the site evaluation program, and he has a long history with the site and understanding of it. Harry Zinn, who many of you know, who's done a great deal of the well sampling here, he is an environmental engineer with the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources, also in the site evaluation program. John Bornholm is a remedial project manager at EPA Region 4. John, many of you have heard this term now, MPL, that the site did not score on the MPL. John will be able to answer specific questions about how that process works. Next name is Anita Davis. Anita Davis is a section chief in EPA's Emergency Response and Removal Program. Jim Webster was the on-scene coordinator from about 2000, 2004? Mid-2004. And it was under his direction that the administrative order on consent with CTS Corporation and Mills Gap Associates was constructed. Greg Powell is an EPA environmental scientist. He's with our emergency response team in Cincinnati, which is sort of an internal consulting division for scientific expertise. And he's conducted a lot of the hydrogeological studies here on the site, as well as something we'll be talking about later, geophysical surveys. So he's available for technical information. Greg also will be taking on some more roles in the site in the future. So on we go. Okay. What are some just key points here we want to make right from the start, before we get into history and the chronology and all that sort of detail? There has been well sampling. Past the 1999 initial determination of contamination, residential well sampling in 2000, 2003, and again in 2006. All of that data for those residential wells was non-detect for all constituents that we measured. Overview. Okay, I think most of you know this, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. IRC operated an electroplating facility there from 53 to 59. CTS came in and operated a electronics component manufacturing from 1959 to 1985. Of the original, I've heard 54, I've heard 55, but around there, acres of that property, 46 are redeveloped, leaving the 9-acre industrial area, which you see now fenced on Millscap Road. Millscap Associates is the current owner of that 9-acre portion. And the contaminants identified over the years through various studies include trichloroethylene, which is just called TCE, TCA, cadmium, petroleum constituents. Of these, really what we're talking about is TCE. This is the main, this is what we see in significant quantities in the springs. This is what flows down from the springs into the wells. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm an engineer by training, and sometimes the three-letter acronyms, TLAs, just roll off too quickly. TCA is trichloroethane, is the name of that chemical. Okay, so we have in 1985, we have a preliminary assessment. In 1991, we have a site screening inspection phase 2. What that means is they evaluate the site under the Superfund program to determine if it scores on the national priority list, most commonly called the NPL. In fact, there were 4 attempts to score this site on the NPL, and they all come to no further action planned under Superfund. What does that mean? We call it a NIFRAP. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that there is no contamination on site. It means that the contamination based upon a relative scoring system did not score high enough to warrant a federal response from EPA under the remedial program in Superfund. The other times the sites, we tried to score the site was 2003 and again in 2006. I will be very straight with you. It is often, EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, it is often very, very challenging at sites that do not score on the NPL, where there is contamination, pose very unique challenges to communities. In 1985 and 1981, when the site did not score, it was referred to the state, and it goes into their inactive hazardous sites branch. In 1999, the Emergency Response Program responded to concerns raised by DENR about contamination in the springs next to the site. There were residents drinking water from those springs and from a nearby well. Subsequent testing indicated significant levels of trichloroethylene. The Emergency Response Program immediately provided, this was Fred, right? Okay. Provided bottled water to the residents and ensured connection to the Asheville municipal system. There was subsequent residential well testing, as I mentioned in the initial slide, to follow up with the wells that were nearby but had not shown contamination. In the years that followed, EPA first goes through a process where it identifies who the potentially responsible parties are. Those people who have owned the site may have potentially contributed to the contamination, or may have potentially contributed to contamination. And a negotiation process began with CTS Corporation and Asheville's Gap Association. And this was really Jim's work in this regard. And these negotiations culminated in the very end of 2003, in the very beginning of 2004,